Welcome to the Reboot Chronicles, your gateway to the world's most influential leaders who are rebooting their organizations and themselves to thrive in unprecedented times. I'm your host, Dean DeBias, CEO who's rebooted dozens of companies, creating billions in value. My passion is uncovering inspiring reboot stories. So buckle up, lean in, and please share this episode with a friend. It may help reboot their career and their life.
Today on the Reboot Chronicles, we're honored to welcome a voice you've seen and heard across the globe, Dr. Marc Siegel, a practicing internist, clinical professor of medicine at NYU. Dr. Siegel is the Fox News senior medical analyst and the medical director at Dr. Radio on SiriusXM. For nearly 2 decades, he's been a trusted guide through the most pressing public health challenges of our time, from SARS and swine flu to COVID, helping millions make sense of science in real time. Best-selling author who just released his must-read 6th book, The Miracles Among Us, How God's Grace Plays a Role in Healing, which debuted at the #1 slot for New York Times and Publishers Weekly bestseller list. Amazing. He's also penned influential works like False Alarm, The Truth About the Epidemic and Fear and COVID, The Politics of Fear, and The Power of Science, each tackling the intersections of medicine, media, and public trust. With columns in the Wall Street Journal, The Hill, USA Today, and the LA Times, he's interviewed presidents, senators, and top health officials, bringing clarity and candor to conversations that matter the most. Often on the front lines of reporting, from his first exclusive interview with Boston Marathon bombing survivors to warning the world about the coming pandemic after he visited the National Quarantine Unit in Nebraska. I was actually out there that month. Very scary when it first started. But today he's here to share his reboot moment when he realized that faith is not just personal, but essential to health and healing. This is going to be a great conversation. Hopefully we'll bridge science, spirit, and resilience, and trust me, you're going to want to stick around to the end. Marc, welcome to the show. Good to see you.
Great to see you. Great intro.
Thanks. I had some help writing that. I actually got goosebumps reading it, which has happened a few times, but I had a little flashback there to COVID we could maybe talk about. But, I wanted you on because your career is, a lot of us have watched you and listened to you, and you've helped, guide us, but your career is defined like not only as your medical expertise, but something I value in a top doc really is your ability to translate this complex stuff of science, let's just call it, into really accessible insights that we can act on. And I love that about you.
Dean, listening to the intro, I thought of something I hadn't thought before, which is when you write, and I'm a writer by training before I became a physician, you use the writing as an exploration, even an op-ed. I used to do a column for the LA Times called The Unreal World, where I looked at TV and movies for medical accuracy. And in analyzing TV and movies, I didn't necessarily find they were medically accurate most of the time, but I found what the game was, what the narrative was. And that's what writing is an explanation, is an exploration. And if that's an exploration, imagine what a book is. A book is a huge excavation. And the book False Alarm I wrote taught me that we're afraid of the wrong things, that we fear the minuscule, that we fear the commonplace. And then I wrote another book called The Inner Pulse about how we should be looking more at putting mind and body together.
I remember that one.
And that led probably to this book, where I looked at realities that involve both the mind and body, and fear not your fellow man, but what about God? So by bringing God and prayer into it, I found these stories that were just unbelievable. And they told themselves. And in each story, my publisher would say, what's the miracle here? And my editor and publisher had 2 different ideas, and I'll show you how it came together in the book. My editor was, as we go on in the chapter, we want to learn the miracle, not on the first page, but as the chapter goes on. And the publisher was saying each chapter should have a signature miracle. But you know what I found in writing them? Both were right, but that it was more than one miracle. The miracles evolved so that the reader keeps reading. Okay, I got one miracle. Now here comes another one. Now here comes another one. And the miracles were either technological, or they were ineffable, or they were divine intervention, or they were the coincidences that God gives you when you're in a medical lane, where things just keep happening a certain way. A fellow physician said to me on the air the other night, well, what about the times when there aren't a miracle? when things go wrong? And that was a great question she asked, because it made me realize that's what makes doctors too cold. It's what makes doctors,
You're right.
makes them not open to miracles. They've had too many times when miracles didn't occur that they begin to forget that God chooses them, and they don't happen every minute. Everybody's been through one, but you can't say now is time for a miracle. That's God that does that.
What do you mean by, you said miracles accrue, and it's like a compilation of coincidences, similar to the Old Testament. What do you mean by that?
Well, that is the Old Testament, and that's, I think, what the book is based on. But there again,
Yeah.
it wasn't what I had in mind. Aaron's staff in the Old Testament is giving these little miracles all the time, and they accrue, not
Right.
like a bolt of lightning from the sky. I do cover the chapter Lords in this book, and in that chapter, I look at the Catholic Church's definition of miracle, where you have to completely defy science. I believe that occurs. I
Yeah.
believe that Sister Bernadette suddenly walked again. I believe that your friend did, that you started to tell me about. I believe that sometimes it's all divine intervention, and sometimes it's a combination of great medicine, great coincidences, and divine intervention.
Amen. That's the other reason I really wanted you on the show quickly, because I have witnessed this. My friend Pete down here in Florida, he essentially had, Lewy Body's disease, which is very devastating, combination of dementia and Parkinson's on steroids. I think couldn't walk. And he accepted Jesus into his life, and within hours, not days and weeks and months, recovered to the miraculous stupefaction of everyone at Cleveland Clinic. They still cannot figure it out. They have no explanation. And that was 2 years ago. And he literally woke up after a couple hours of, he was still conscious, but he was out. And threw his crutches in the closet, took his leg braces off, and he's walking. He walks more in a day now than I do probably all month. Just a miracle. I've never seen anything like it. And you must have had so many stories in the book, like Pete's story. But what I also liked is you verified them. You just didn't take, I just gave you stories. You're probably, you're a journalist at heart. You're going to go research that and say, how did you do that, by the way? How did you prove a lot of these things actually happened or worked?
By talking to a number of people from different vantage points, including the vantage point of I don't believe. A great example was Robert Redfield's son, Danny. Redfield is the former CDC director and a devoutly religious Catholic who met with Pope John Paul II during the AIDS epidemic. And Pope John Paul said to him, there's three main tenets here that you have to focus on. He said to him, one is that there's a personal God. And that's very important to this book, because Spinoza didn't believe that. Spinoza in the 1600s believed that God is found in nature. He is found in nature, but he's also a personal God. And John Paul II said he's a personal God, and the greatest tool you have is prayer. Redfield believed all of that, but then John Paul II said, and there's a redemptive value in human suffering, which doctors don't want to believe. That's not our role to believe that. We're humanists. The best of us are humanists. But Redfield came to believe that through HIV, that sometimes suffering is rewarded at the other end with that miracle. So that's in my book. But here's what happened with this whole issue. You're bringing up science versus faith.
Right.
Redfield being the faith side, ironically, a great virologist, he represents faith. And his dear friend Tom Scalia, up in Maryland Shock Trauma, the number one place in the country for trauma, he represents pure science. So they fly Redfield's son Danny up there after he smashes his head, and he ends up in a deep coma, almost herniates, partly herniates. And they treat him by removing part of his skull. They treat him by using diuretics. They use steroids. They stand him up, which decreases intracranial pressure. They got all kinds of tricks. So I say to Scalia, what are the chances that a person like that would survive? He says less than 1%, less than 5%. I said, well, but Redfield's praying every day, and his wife is praying every day. He says, we have fights about that. Redfield thinks that valuable. I think, I don't know. I said, but what are the chances that a guy like this would have full neurological recovery? He says, I've never seen it. So here's what happens with Danny, team. Here's what happens with him. He wakes up, first of all. That's number one. Then there's a famous scene in the book where Dr. Redfield is sitting with his son in a cafeteria, and he says, what's the matter with your eye? It looks like you can't focus your eye. And Danny says, I can't see out of that eye. So Redfield goes back to God and says, you told me my son would have a full recovery. And 2 weeks later, he can see. And I said to Dr. Redfield, you criticized the Almighty? And Redfield said, of course, that's the personal aspect of it. That's the personal God.
Yep.
But the most important thing out of that story is that Bobby Redfield, who is Robert Redfield's son and is a transplant surgeon, he didn't believe. He wasn't a believer. But when he saw what happened with his brother Danny, where both frontal lobes of the brain were severely damaged and one of the temporal lobes was severely damaged, and they had to take part of his skull off, he said, he's a surgeon. He said, I've never seen anything like this. And then he fully recovers. He goes back out on the golf course, Danny, and he beats his old scores, and he goes around the country, and he's striving, and he's completely with it. And I spoke to him. Bobby Redfield is a believer now. It can't have happened without God's direct intervention.
It's the same thing with Pete's story. I mean, his doctor's been practicing for 43 years at Cleveland Clinic. He's the top dog. They took him to all these facilities to try to help him. He's still, you must have heard this from so many doctors. Like, can you explain it? Like, no, it shouldn't have happened. It's like, it's out of my hands. Doctors really aren't trained to even accept some of that thinking. But what you're seeing is a lot of them are actually. They're kind of, sounds like some of them are going with this as a piece of, treatment, therapy.
I think it is. I think the best doctors put it together. They're not just mechanics. They're not just mechanics. They're healing the soul. They're healing the mind. They have to pay attention to a patient's attitude. They have to be open to a spiritual reality as well as a physical one. They don't have to be, but it makes them a lot better at what they do. It makes them better physicians, not worse. I think physicians are afraid that if they bring their faith into the operating room or into the patient's examination room, it's somehow going to weaken the science. That's not true. And this book explores that issue.
Yeah, that's a good one. Another issue, this is going to get sensitive. Not everybody gets God, right? And so can it help people that have different types of faith or religions, I guess is one question. And then what about the non-believers, the agnostics, the atheists, can they benefit from any type of faith-based healing?
Well, of course they can. And again, the stories in this book aren't really about whether somebody believes or not. There's stories in the book where non-believers participate in what's essentially a miracle. I'm not there to say, hey, this is a miracle. I'm going to convince you. That's why I write stories. That's why I'm a writer. Read the book and see what you think. I have already converted a lot of people that are on the fence. If somebody wants to read this book and say, well, this is just tremendous coincidence, I don't think, Dean, that people realize that it's more arrogant to say there is no God than to say there's a larger reality beyond my ability to comprehend. I just don't happen to believe in a specific religion, or maybe I do, maybe I don't. To state that there's no God with all of these things going on around us, telepathy. Have you ever had that experience where the phone rings and you knew 5 seconds before who it was? How do you explain that? What is that? Brain waves being, zoomed across the room? How come a character in this book is a pharmacist in Minnesota and has a dream about a baby in Ethiopia that needs a heart operation? And then a famous actress is handing the baby to her and she's going to do the operation. Turns out there is such an actress. There is such a baby. The actress saw the baby the day before. The pharmacist from Minnesota ends up giving the money for the operation. They get the guy who does the operation. How does all that happen with no God? It can't.
Yeah.
So my book gives the stories that reinforce this idea that there's no such thing as a dividing line between science and faith.
Yeah, and I'm into like 3 of the stories so far. They're remarkable. I did ask some fans, what questions do you want to ask Dr. Siegel? So can I just rattle off some things that are maybe not book centric, but many of us, including me, by the way, still suffer from long COVID where they can't smell anything. Are they ever going to be able to fix that?
Well, they're working on it. In fact, our head of virology at NYU, Ben Tenuber, has researched this deeply. The reason that that's the case is because the epithelial cells where COVID resided, the SARS-CoV-2 virus resided, is right next to the olfactory lobe of the brain. So the spike protein ended up in that lobe, and it did a lot of damage. And it is healing over time for a lot of people. I think it was worse with the Delta wave, but people are healing slowly over time, and we're still working on a lot of treatments for that.
Yeah, from those of you that don't have that, what your brain does is it manufactures other smells, mostly unpleasant. So you're smelling something, it's telling you it's something else. It's bizarre, and I've got a few friends that have. How about things like uncurable things, tinnitus, neuropathy? I can go on, but any insights on those two? You got
tinnitus is very hard to treat, and I'm convinced.
I think we'd be billionaires if we solved this.
Tinnitus is associated with a lot of things. I think the vaccine definitely associated with tinnitus, the COVID vaccine. I think COVID itself was definitely associated with tinnitus. Tinnitus is, you can train your brain to not pay attention to it, but it's very, very hard to treat right now. We don't really have a treatment or a cure. Neuropathy, my wife is actually an expert at that, and there are a lot of treatments that make that better. But the key thing with neuropathy is to figure out why you had it in the first place. If it's something like a B12 deficiency, you can replace B12. If it's something like diabetes, you can control your blood sugars, which will help it. There are also medications that are better than what we used to have. So you have to figure out what's causing it by going to a top expert like her, and then there are treatments.
What about the fat jab? You on that camp or no?
The what?
The weight loss drug.
Oh, the fat jab.
I'm trying not to name a brand.
So the GLP-1 drugs are fantastic, and they've been around for a while for diabetes. I think their safety profile is excellent. I think they help almost every organ in the body. They're good for your brain. They're good for your heart. You got a lot of cardiologists taking it just to lower blood pressure, help the heart, lower cholesterol. I think, again, good for the brain. I think it decreases inflammation in the body, will probably be found to decrease cancer, overcomes insulin resistance. Here's the rub. There may be a problem with the eyes, although nobody has shown that in certain small number of cases. And not everybody can deal with delayed gastric emptying. That's a prominent feature of these drugs. And if you have reflux or severe reflux, you may not be able to tolerate it. So we got to watch the GI tract carefully with this. I think the best way to approach being obese, and we have an obesity epidemic in this society, is to exercise, eat better, get rid of all the ultra-processed foods, sleep more, decrease stress. And yes, if you need these drugs, I'm all for it. I prescribe them.
Yeah, exactly. And last one, both for women and men, this new pellet therapy where they're injecting them with slow release, estrogen and testosterone. And you in that camp, or is that unnecessary in your mind?
I'm in the hormone replacement camp, but again, carefully conceived and carefully considered. I think that the FDA was right to reverse the idea that we scared a lot of women away from hormone replacement because of the risk of breast cancer. I think we overdid that, and I think that's a shame, because I think the hormone replacement idea is pretty valuable, but it's got to be done by very, very carefully trained physicians.
What are moms and dads supposed to be doing? They're, when I was born, I think there's a couple of vaccines. Now there's a laundry list. I can't pronounce any of them. They're confused. Parents are really confused with little kids.
I don't think they should be. I think what's happening now would be better if it wasn't so defined. I don't think we need to replace one dogma with another. I think the dogma of take the vaccines, take them all in sequence, take them when we're telling you to, will put off a lot of women. But the new dogma, watch out for that vaccine, it's dangerous, we have to delay it. There's no evidence it's dangerous. The vaccines have been well studied, and I don't think I like questions. I don't like premature answers. So I'm all for studying things and restudying things and saying how many vaccines and when should we have them. The hepatitis B vaccine at birth is a very good example of that, because the hepatitis B vaccine at birth cut down the number of cases a year from 21,000 to about 20. And that didn't occur as an accident. That occurred because 2.5 million people in the United States have chronic hepatitis B. 70% of them don't know they have it. It can be spread through sex, through birth, through
Yep.
even secretions. And here's my point about that. Like, we can test women all through pregnancy, and that will work just as well. But are women getting those tests? So I think opening the question on hepatitis B vaccine was correct, but giving a premature answer was not.
And what are we doing about the next generation of training doctors? Should we be bringing faith and miracles and that type of thinking into, higher ed, into the medical schools? RFK Jr. is basically, and his colleagues who are friends of yours are, they're really trying to bring more holistic wellness and nutrition, at least back into the curriculum. But what about faith?
RFK Jr. and I talk about this all the time. He's a man of faith. He's a man of spirituality, and he understands and agrees with everything I'm saying in this book and the message I'm saying about this, especially at a time of AI, when we're advancing the technology, where people are surveyed and saying AI has more of empathy than your physician. Are you kidding me? We're doing something wrong, because AI has zero empathy. And so the more technological fingertips we have, the more medical tools we have, the more we have to care, and we have to look at the spiritual side. We got AI to diagnose our breast cancer now. So what are we going to do? Well, we have to interpret all that. We're still a pilot of the ship. They're the co-pilot. I love AI, but I think it even emphasizes more the role for spiritual healing and faith healing, because AI ain't going to do that.
Yeah. I'm working on a faith-based AI startup right now. That's a whole nother discussion, but it seems like in the medical profession, my doctor is very holistic, is also has an extremely busy practice, somewhat concierge, but it's like AI, he wanted it to help him and give him more time so he could spend time with us and do this kind of thing, talking.
Exactly.
And it's the opposite has been happening to him. So I said, well, I'm his tech guy apparently. So I'm like, well, we're still in this phase of we don't know what we don't know, and we're enamored with it. Rather than it enabling us, we're almost becoming it's more like eye candy right now. We're a little bit slaves to it versus enabling the next generation of doctors and current ones.
By the way, that's a trap door I want to talk about, Dean, because we had that when we went to electronic health records. We were told,
oh yeah,
that was going to liberate us.
Disaster.
And it ended up enslaving us. So we got to be very careful about exactly what you're saying here. AI doesn't need to be another hurdle. Doctors don't need that right now. AI has to liberate us. And the way it liberates us is by being a co-pilot. And I agree with Trump what he's doing here, trying to deregulate it. I think it has a really, really massive role in medical practice going forward. But we have to we got to get back to figuring out why doctors are so overburdened. It doesn't mean that I think doctors out there don't have faith. 70% of doctors are religious, 70% believe in medical miracles, and 55% believe those miracles are occurring in their own practice. The question is, can they bring to bear on their practice all of that faith, all of that spirituality, all of that honoring the patient? That's what I want to see, and that's what my book is about.
And you give them tips. I mean, as I was reading it, it seemed I was more of the audience, but they are a huge part of the audience. So how do you help them? What advice? We're doing a seminar for like 100 doctors tomorrow, just regular ones, not the hot shots. What tips would you give them to bring spirituality back in their care curriculum, or in the way that they...
I think it's inherent in all of the stories of my book, which is it comes from listening. It comes from not being dogmatic, not superimposing your own ideology, not defining circumstances in a limited way. Somebody asks you for a prognosis, give that prognosis, but don't be afraid to say, I've had cases where that hasn't happened. Or you don't want to take away a patient's hope, especially when there's hope to be had. And that's true of every story in my book. I had a nurse write to me the other day who made the same point. And what she loved about the book was that she said she was a neuro ICU nurse for many years, and people came in with head trauma. They came in with gunshots to the head, the way it's probably happened with Andrew Wolf, the staff sergeant, the unfortunate National Guardsman.
Yeah.
But we see people recover from that. I interviewed somebody for Fox who was shot in the head by a jealous boyfriend going after his date, and he ended up recovering, and he's out there as a missionary. So I think I think, and we're using stem cells for neurogrowth factor now. I think that we can't write people off too soon. That's not what our role is, and that should be in your courts tomorrow. What's your attitude towards your patient? You're not there you're not a pathologist. I mean, there are pathologists, but you're not a pathologist. You're there to heal. What is a healer? It's somebody who combines a spiritual belief with their tools, with their physical tools. It's combining mind and body.
Yeah, and they're trained. I mean, I don't know if it's HIPAA or whatever stupid regulation we put in place. I don't even think they're allowed to ask what is your faith and religion, and all they really want is your emergency contact information. That seems like in all those forms they fill out, they don't seem to gather the holistic ones unless they do this. They have a real conversation about, where are you? What's troubling you? How are you doing? Are you not doing?
And that's the real art of medicine, and that's the real art of medicine, and that makes it really important.
Your book is just filled with these impactful stories. Which ones surprised you the most? They're all a bit surprising, but when you started to dig into one, maybe you didn't believe it. Maybe it was the one that you probably had the least believability factor. But yeah, which
I think the two that surprised me the most. One is the medical missionary in Africa, in Sudan, and it turns out that the miracle is the internet actually working to give him an instruction video to where he could operate on a 9-year-old patient with cancer in both kidneys. And the video was in Polish, and he didn't speak Polish, and the internet hadn't worked in weeks.
Whoa.
And when it came on, it was so slow, and they barely were able to get it. He says, I can't even remember the last time I was ever able to look at a video. And he didn't have the equipment in the video, but he was able to get enough to actually save the young girl's life. That blew me away, because I was interviewing people from an organization called African Mission Healthcare and putting them all on the radio, and I had a selection of miracles to choose from. And I chose the one that was the most prominent. And again, as you already realized, I interviewed people many different angles to figure out what to tell in the story. In this case, it wasn't medical. It was circumstantial. How'd that internet work? God's presence.
Yep.
And the other one was that in the story about the Rebbe, Menachem Schneerson, I told that story about his carpenter.
Yeah.
And about his carpenter finding his wife magically by looking out the window while he's working on repairing the Rebbe's house. And then we go through a whole story with the guy's son that he has with this woman. He has 3 sons, but the third one is sick. And the Rebbe kind of sees with this miraculous vision. He sees that he has a problem with his heart. And no one knows it, because he sees that he has a broken letter in his mezuzah on the door. And that letter looks like a heart. So he has him look for a cardiologist. And the cardiologist says, I'm not listening to any rabbi. Are you kidding me? This is another message in the book. Listen to everyone. Don't only listen to your specific sources. Listen to everyone. Be open to everyone. That's another thing for your seminar tomorrow, Dean. Be open to incoming, whether it's from a chat GPT or whether it's from a family member who says, they don't look quite right. The person doesn't look quite right. You're the doctor. You put it all together. But don't say, I'm not listening to some rabbi. The baby had a cardiac arrest, and then they had to do emergency surgery, and they saved the baby. The Rebbe was right. But the thing that was most miraculous in that chapter was that at the very end of his life, the Rebbe is being taken care of by a doctor down at one of the NYU affiliate hospitals. And this doctor realizes that he has no more miracles left for other people. People come to him, they want $1. They want $1 to go to give to charity to get a miracle, because he's the big bestower of God's miracles. But he has none left for himself, and he dies. That woman doctor, ends up on the wards where she meets me and becomes my wife. And I realized when I wrote the chapter that was the Rebbe's final miracle, that I received it. That's what writing is. You write a story, and the story teaches you something.
Yeah, very cathartic too. What was it like when you first realized this? You weren't always like this. When did you start? When did faith become a part of your not just your treatment, but your approach to medical care? How did that change you?
Well, there's two events that changed me. One was when my first son was born. I, like all first-time fathers, was going through a period of confusion. What's my role now? What am I supposed to do? I was walking down the street, and somebody handed me a prayer book and said, pray for the health of your newborn son. I said, how do you know I have a son? He said, I know. I said, I know.
Wow.
I said, I didn't tell you. How do you know? And as I was walking away from that man, I kept looking behind me to see if he was really there. I thought I was imagining it, but he was there. And that changed my life. That made me religious. The second thing that happened to me was that as a young resident, I was in the ICU, and there was a guy there in a coma because he had severely injured his head, and he wasn't supposed to wake up. But the family was by the bedside praying with him every single day, and they kept nonstop praying. And they would say to me, isn't his heart rate going up? Isn't his blood pressure going up? Isn't his oxygen level going up? Isn't his eyelids twitching? And I would say, no. And I was getting frustrated. Like, I felt so sorry for them. And I felt we would talk about it. Fellow residents would talk about it. We became almost dismissive. And I thought, Dean, this is going to be my career, where we keep dealing with families that are filled with hope, and we don't know how to put them down off of their pedestal. We don't know how to bring back reality. I thought this is going to be my career, being sardonic and sarcastic and dismissive. And all of a sudden, several weeks later, the guy one day completely wakes up. He completely wakes up.
No way.
His heart rate goes up. His blood pressure goes up. He starts breathing. His eyelids are twitching. He opens his eyes. The family was totally right, and God was in that room. He wakes up and he leaves the hospital and goes back to work. So the lesson to me wasn't that I was going to become this dismissive doctor, but that I was going to honor God's presence in all healing. The exact opposite of what I thought happened. It was an event that has affected the rest of my life, where I am one of the last to give up hope.
Wow, that is one of the most remarkable reboot stories we've covered. And people need that. They need that cathartic event so they never give up hope. Thanks, Mark. Really appreciate you joining us today.
Great to be with you.
It's been so rewarding and thought-provoking. The whole thing has just been fantastic.
Well, I'd love to stay in touch with you about AI. We could talk about that.
Absolutely. Yeah. We'll work on that together. You've been listening to Dr. Marc Siegel on the Reboot Chronicles. This is Dean DeBias. Subscribe wherever you get podcasts or at rebootchronicles.com.